Hello, everyone. So sometimes I feel like I'm sitting on a train that left one station but never really arrived at another. It's like I got off somewhere in between, a quiet stretch of track where no one's waiting. People on the left think you've gone too far. People on the right think you haven't gone far enough. But leaving one side doesn't always mean joining the other. Sometimes it just means you wanted to stop the train long enough to ask where it's actually going. That's where I've been lately. Just looking out the window and trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. Because online, everything feels louder than it used to. Anger now gets rewarded. Rhetoric gets extreme. And when you mix politics with identity and faith, people stop listening altogether. So I wanted to talk with you about what I've been seeing. Honestly, not as a side, but as a person. So, I've been seeing a lot of really toxic rhetoric online, especially around gender and relationships. To be fair, I get why many men are frustrated right now. The culture shifted fast, and not always in healthy ways. For years, women were held to unfair double standards when it came to sex and relationships. And when they finally pushed back, the answer from some corners was just to create new double standards instead of fixing the old ones. Instead of saying maybe that behavior was unhealthy for everyone, many decided to just copy the exact same sexual behaviors that men have been doing, for example, like casual hookups, emotional detachment, and treating relationships like games, as if that would somehow make things equal. But that wasn't equality, that was just pain repackaged as freedom. And repeating a problem isn't the same as solving it. Then there's another extreme. People who want everything without giving anything back. I've seen women online expecting men to pay for everything, take care of everything, and still be called controlling if they ask for partnership in return. That's not equality. That's entitlement. If you want a 50-50 relationship, that doesn't always mean money. It means effort, accountability, and mutual care. So if one partner can't give equally financially, there are still ways to contribute that make both people feel valued. And I'm not saying this to defend every single angry man online either, because a lot of that anger comes from entitlement or from refusing to do any self-reflection or accountability. But some of the frustrations out there are real. For example, the Me Too movement was meant to expose real abuse, and it did, but it also left some men feeling like even normal interaction could be misinterpreted. A recent poll in datepsychology.com, for example, found that over 40% of young men now say they're uncomfortable even approaching women. And that's a huge cultural shift, and a sign that something in the conversation is broken and needs changing. The reasons for that finding aside, I can understand why men are frustrated in the system in general, because it seems to have gone against them in certain ways. For example, where single women might rely on government benefits rather than finding a stable partner, or where men are told to stay strong, stay dominant, and be masculine, but to leave women alone. Not only that, I see conflicting messages directed at men. That they're being too masculine, for example, the toxic masculinity rhetoric. Anyway, all of that got jumbled, and it's very confusing for a lot of men. They were told not to change, to stay the same, but all of a sudden women changed, and they didn't know where to go. Still, being frustrated doesn't give anyone permission to regress. Some men are angry because there's more competition in the job market now. Because women can work, they can earn, they can succeed just like they can. But if their solution to that frustration is to reintroduce oppression, then they've already proven to be part of the problem. So my point is, rolling back equality isn't a fix for insecurity. I have no problem calling that out. The world changed, and everyone's still trying to adjust, but instead of learning to cooperate, some people doubled down on bitterness. It's like everyone's shouting from opposite ends of the same train car, not realizing they're both on the same ride. Okay, on to a different subject. So, in the comments section of one of my previous videos, someone challenged me to make a video about how most women don't like having female bosses. The implication was clear. They wanted me to say that women are bad leaders and that this somehow invalidated my entire point about cultural hypocrisy and gender double standards. And this person clearly wanted me to research the topic in order to admit that I was wrong. I could have ignored them, but instead I did a deep dive on this very subject. In my research, I found that yes, some older surveys did in fact show that many women said they preferred male bosses, but that's only half the truth. So, a Gallup poll from the 1950s, all throughout the 2013, consistently found that Americans, both men and women, were more comfortable with male bosses. Even as recently as 2013, about 35% of workers said they preferred a man in charge, compared with around 20% who preferred a woman, and 40% who said it didn't matter. But researchers have explained that this historical preference wasn't really about women's competence. It reflected Tolkienism in male-dominated workplaces, where women often felt they had to compete with each other for limited positions and could only advance by aligning with male authority. As more women entered leadership roles and these workplaces diversified, that perception began to shift dramatically. So, by 2017, that same source, Gallup, found that those attitudes had almost completely leveled out. 27% of women said they preferred a male boss, and 28% preferred a female boss, and 44% said they had no preference at all. Researchers noted that this shift aligns with broader cultural changes. As more women advanced into leadership positions, the old biases tied to Tolkienism and competition started to fade. Studies from Harvard Business Review and McKinsey have also found that companies with more women in executive roles actually outperform their competitors financially, and researchers like Robin Ely and Rosabeth Moss Cantor have found that when women aren't outnumbered or Tolkienized, they report higher trust, less competition, and stronger collaboration. The supposed conflict between women disappears when they're not being measured by masculine standards or fighting for limited recognition. And for anyone still trying to revive the old narrative, newer data shows that it's outdated. I rely mostly on Gallup, one of the most respected and reliable sources for long-term opinion data, so that's the one I decided to show. And as you saw before, the preferences for male or female bosses are now nearly identical, with most people saying it doesn't matter. And that change alone proves how much the environment shapes perception. When representation and opportunity improve, biases started to dissolve, and they were already starting to dissolve in around 2013. In 2013, Forbes came out with an article that basically said Americans prefer a male boss, but it's less than they used to. When I went hunting online for more recent data, I found a few articles here and there showing that women did not like having a female boss, but I did not find any reputable source as reliable as Gallup. So I'm just going to focus on Gallup for now. But even if the 2017 data is now considered outdated and opinions have shifted again in 2025, the fact that these opinions changed so drastically in the first place, to me, is proof that these preferences are driven by circumstance, not sex. The reason people might prefer one gender over another as a boss have always had more to do with the environment, the culture, and the systems surrounding them than with someone's abilities. So no, women aren't bad leaders. They're just often leading in systems that weren't built to support them. When those systems change, the results speak for themselves. And here's something else. Someone cited research to me claiming that single fathers do much better than single mothers, and it immediately took me back to something one of my sociology professors said in college. They use the same line the same way. Every time I hear this argument, it feels less about understanding reality and more about undermining the importance of women. But when you actually dig into the research, the story completely changes. For example, the U.S. Census Bureau and Pew Research Center have both noted that single fathers, on average, tend to have higher incomes and lower poverty rates than single mothers. But researchers are quick to point out that this has far more to do with economics and opportunity than with parenting ability. Many single fathers have already reached a more stable financial position before gaining custody, while single mothers are more likely to face the gender wage gap, higher childcare costs, and less social support. When you look at studies published in places like the Journal of Marriage and Family, and the differences between single mothers and single fathers almost disappear once you account for income, education, and support. Research by Michaela Dufer and colleagues in 2010 found that while there are small differences in parenting behaviors, they're sensitive to demographic disparities and don't translate into academic deficits for children. In other words, when parents have equal access to resources and stability, kids do just as well with either single parent in either sex. Other research, summarized by the American Psychology Association and Child Trends, along with a 2020 review in the Journal of Marriage and Family by Kai Nobaguchi and Melissa Milkey, found something similar. When mothers and fathers face the same conditions, financially, socially, and emotionally, their levels of reported stress are almost identical. What determines how well a parent fares isn't their gender, it's things like social support, financial stability, and access to childcare. So when people say single fathers do better, what they're really describing is the outcome of an unequal system, not proof that one sex is inherently more capable than the other. Across all of this research, the conclusion is remarkably consistent. Economics, demographics, and culture shape parenting outcomes far more than sex. Gender may influence how those forces show up, but it isn't the deciding factor in who becomes a capable parent. Still, the studies don't ignore how hard single parenthood truly is. Both single mothers and single fathers face heavier stress, time pressure, and emotional strain. Not because of who they are, but because they're carrying what is meant to be shared. Two-parent households tend to have an advantage, not because one gender does it better, but because humans are wired for cooperation. We're built to cohabitate, to share responsibilities and emotional support. When one person is left to hold everything alone, it's not a moral failure, it's a reflection of how deeply we are meant to rely on one another. Maybe the problem isn't that we're on different trains, it's that we forgot we're on the exact same one. The track only works when we're connected, and somewhere along the way, we stopped riding together. Alright, that's all for now. I hope I haven't bored any of you. Bye!